He was a billionaire CEO with no one left to come home to. She was a widowed schoolteacher, just trying to keep her daughters fed. And they were complete strangers, until one turbulent flight changed everything. But what would make a powerful, emotionally sealed-off man cry in silence at 30,000 feet? What secret did two little girls whisper that made him freeze in place, tears still clinging to his eyes? What happens when a heart that's been broken by loss meets another that's still learning how to breathe? And perhaps the biggest question of all, can a single moment, a single sentence, turn a life built on grief into something filled with hope? This isn't just a story about love. It's about redemption, about second chances in the most unexpected places, about finding family where you least expect it. Buckle up, because what starts with a tear-stained business class seat ends with 3 words that will shake your soul. If this story moves you even a little, like, share, and subscribe for more deeply human stories that remind us of what truly matters. Now, let's begin. The cabin was hushed. Only the soft hum of the jet engines and the occasional clink of a glass in first class disturbed the stillness. Somewhere near the front, in seat 2A, a man sat perfectly still. No laptop, no book, no conversation, just stillness and silence. His name was Callum West. To most of the world, he was the mind behind Orion Tech, a multi-million-dollar tech empire that had quietly shaped how the modern world communicated. To those on Flight 417, he was just a man in a dark gray suit, sitting upright, with a distant look in his eyes. No one dared bother him. Even the flight attendants, usually so chipper in first class, had whispered to each other, not daring to do more than refill his glass when needed. In front of him, a screen flickered with the welcome message, "Welcome aboard Novus Air New York to San Francisco." But he didn't look. He didn't care. He wasn't on this flight for a meeting, or a merger, or a deal. He was flying because today marked exactly 2 years since Evelyn, his wife. His anchor was lowered into the ground. And he hadn't been back to San Francisco since. Callum reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. His fingers closed around the small, worn envelope, creased at the edges, yellowed from time and fingerprints. It was unopened. It had arrived 3 days after Evelyn's funeral. No return address, just her handwriting on the front. If you're reading this, you already know. He had carried it with him ever since, through boardroom battles, billion-dollar announcements, and sleepless nights. But he had never opened it. Not yet. He wasn't ready. Not when grief turned into ritual. Not when pain became a predictable companion. Now, on this flight, with 5 hours left and nowhere else to go. He wondered, was today the day? The man beside him in 2B, a sharply dressed hedge fund manager, judging by the loud phone calls at boarding, leaned slightly and stole a glance, then turned away, unsettled. Something about Callum's stillness was too complete, like someone holding their breath for years. A flight attendant approached quietly. He was young, with careful posture and gentle eyes. "Mr. West," he said softly, holding a crystal glass. "Would you like anything else to drink, water, tea?" Callum blinked, as if waking up. "No," he said, then paused. "I'm fine. Thank you. Liam, is it?" The attendant looked surprised. "Yes, sir." Callum offered a faint nod. "You remember details like that? That's rare these days." Then he turned back toward the window. Below, cottony clouds spread endlessly, glowing under the afternoon sun. He reached again for the envelope, but this time his hand stopped midway, because just in front of him, across the aisle, 2 small heads popped up. 2 girls, no older than 6, identical curls, identical pink headphones. One held a worn-out stuffed giraffe. The other had a lollipop tucked between her teeth like a tiny pirate. They had been giggling for the last 20 minutes, playing some quiet guessing game between themselves. But now, one of them was staring directly at him. Her eyes, big and unblinking, locked onto his like she was trying to read a book in his face. Callum stiffened. He had never been good with children, and certainly not now. Not today. He turned away, but then he heard it. A soft whisper, almost too quiet to be real. The girl leaned forward between the seats and said, simply, "You look lonely." Callum froze. Silence fell over the row. Even her sister looked surprised. Before he could respond, the same girl added, "Do you need a hug?" He didn't know how to breathe. He stared, swallowed, then stared again. No one had asked him anything like that in years. Not in 2 long, aching years. He felt something shift deep in his chest, a tightness pulling, cracking, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled. Not a big smile, not even a full one, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. The kind of smile that said, "I forgot what that felt like." From across the aisle, a gentle voice rose. "I'm so sorry," the girl's mother said, reaching across to pull them back gently. "They're a little too friendly sometimes." She looked about his age, maybe younger, hair in a loose braid, jeans slightly worn. No designer bags, no polished makeup, just real. Callum shook his head, voice low but steady. "It's okay," he said. "They're just honest." He looked at the girls again, and this time he nodded. "I think I did need that." The lights in the cabin dimmed slightly. Dinner service had begun, but Callum hadn't touched the tray in front of him. Chicken or past it didn't matter. His appetite had boarded a different flight years ago. Instead, he stared at the envelope on his tray table, still unopened, still whispering like it had a pulse of its own. Across the aisle, the girls were now coloring quietly. The mother, her name tag on a soft travel backpack read Nora Bennett, had gently laid a sweater over their laps. They were calm now, but Callum wasn't. His fingers hovered over the seal. He let out a breath. And in that breath, memory rushed in. San Francisco, 2 years ago. The rain was warm that morning. A strange contradiction. Callum had stood under a black umbrella, staring down at the casket. Evelyn West, 1979, 2023. His wife, the one person who never cared about his bank account, his press interviews, or his perfectly tailored suits. She was the first to call him out, the first to pull him off his laptop, the first to say, "You're allowed to be human, Callum," and she was gone. Cancer didn't care about billionaires, or promises, or timing. They had just started talking about adopting. She'd picked out names. She wanted to plant lemon trees. She never got to. The last thing she'd said before slipping into a coma was, "Don't lose your heart trying to save your legacy." Back on the plane, Callum swallowed hard. He didn't realize he was gripping the envelope again. This time, he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in her favorite ink, lavender blue. "Callum, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. And I hate that. But I need you to know this. You don't owe the world your perfection. You owe it your presence. You've built walls for years. I've watched them go higher with every award, every acquisition, every fear. But inside you, there's still a man who laughs with his eyes, who reads poetry in secret, who once cried watching a father braid his daughter's hair in a coffee shop. Find that man again. And when you do, don't just survive. Live. Love always. Evelyn." His eyes burned. He didn't notice the tears at first, didn't feel the first drop hit his knuckle, didn't hear the slow gasp from the passenger beside him, but he felt the ache, the cavern in his chest cracking wider, finally letting breath back in. He folded the letter carefully, pressed it to his heart, and closed his eyes. Just then, a small hand reached across the aisle, a child's hand, tiny fingers, warm. Zoe, or maybe it was her sister. Elle was standing at the armrest. She didn't say a word this time. She simply looked at him with eyes too old for her age and did something simple. She offered him a lemon candy. Callum blinked. He took it and laughed. It was the kind Evelyn used to keep in her purse, across the aisle. Nora smiled softly. She said it's her special candy for sad days. Her voice was kind, but cautious, like she was treading lightly around something she didn't fully understand. Callum met her gaze for the first time. Something about her eyes. They held that familiar knowing, like someone who had also stood in the rain, with nothing but a name carved in stone to talk to. "I didn't catch your daughter's names," he said quietly. Nora tilted her head. "The one with the giraffe is Zoe. The other is Elle. Twins. 7. He nodded. "They're extraordinary." She shrugged, a humble kind of pride behind it. "They saved me, too." The plane jolted slightly, just turbulence. But for Callum, something else shook loose. He looked down at the candy in his hand. Bright yellow, unapologetically sweet. Evelyn would have found this moment poetic. And for once, Callum agreed. He turned to the flight attendant as he passed by again. "Liam," he said, "can I ask a favor?" The attendant paused. "Of course, sir? Could you ask the girls if I can give them something? Just something small?" Liam smiled. "I'll check." Callum opened his bag and pulled out 2 black velvet boxes. Inside were 2 origami birds, gold-plated, delicately folded by a Japanese artist he once sponsored. He had never known why he kept them. Now he did. Moments later, Zoe and Elle approached his seat. Curious, he bent down, opened the boxes, and whispered, "These are phoenix birds. They rise again no matter how badly they've burned. I think they belong to you now." The girls gasped. Elle hugged him. Zoe kissed his cheek. Callum smiled fully this time. And across the aisle, Nora touched her heart. The plane was quiet again. Most of the passengers in first class had slipped into a light post-meal doze. Soft jazz hummed from the overhead speakers. Callum, however, felt more awake than he had in months. He sat with his hands loosely clasped, the warmth of Zoe and Elle's gift exchange still lingering in his chest like an afterglow. Across the aisle, Nora adjusted her daughter's blankets and settled back in her seat. Her eyes met his. This time, Callum didn't look away. "Thank you," she said softly. For what he asked, she shrugged. For seeing them, most people don't. Callum nodded, thoughtful. "They see kids," she continued, "and expect them to be quiet, behaved, invisible." She paused, then added, "You didn't flinch when Zoe offered you a hug, or her candy. You saw them as people." Callum leaned his head back. "I've spent years surrounded by people who don't actually see me," he said. "Maybe it's time I start seeing others." There was a beat of silence between them. Not awkward, not forced, just honest. Then Nora spoke again. Almost a whisper. "I was married once, too." Callum turned toward her gently. There was a tone in her voice. Not bitterness, not nostalgia, just a clean, quiet ache. "He was their father?" Callum asked softly. She nodded. His name was Adam. We met in college, married young, had the twins after years of trying. Her smile faded. He passed 3 years ago. Construction accident. He was supposed to be off that day. Switched shifts to cover for a friend. Her eyes welled. She blinked quickly. Didn't wipe the tears. Let them be. The day he died, he had packed their lunches, wrote a note on a napkin for each of them. She swallowed hard. They were only 4. They don't remember much, but I do. Every detail. Callum didn't interrupt. He simply listened. I went numb. Nora continued. For a long time. Didn't talk much. Just functioned. For them. She glanced at her girls, peacefully curled under their airplane blankets. They brought me back piece by piece. One silly joke at a time. One crayon drawing. One meltdown at bedtime that forced me to show up, not just exist. Callum's voice was low when he asked, Do you ever wonder why some people survive and others don't? She turned her gaze toward him. Every day, the plane jolted again. Another ripple of turbulence. Neither of them flinched this time. Callum ran a hand through his hair. I've built my life around control, he said. I've hired the best, scheduled the tightest, planned the furthest. But Evelyn, his voice caught for just a second. She taught me that control is just fear in a tailored suit. Nora tilted her head. That's a line, she said. Callum smiled faintly. No, that's me finally understanding her. A soft voice came from below. Zoe had stirred. She blinked up at Callum. Do you miss her? Callum looked into those searching eyes. He didn't hesitate. Every minute. Zoe nodded solemnly. Sometimes I think my daddy is in the stars. Callum swallowed, then replied, Maybe he is. And your wife, Elle, chimed in sleepily. Is she in the stars, too? Callum looked past them, out the cabin window, where the sky had faded into indigo dusk. I think she's in the spaces between them, he said, where the quiet lives, where the love doesn't need words anymore. The girls fell back asleep, this time closer to Nora, but with their hands still wrapped around the tiny phoenix figurines he had given them. Nora leaned in a bit, resting her elbow on the shared armrest. Can I ask you something? She whispered. Callum turned. Of course. Why now? She asked. Why this flight? Why today? He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and showed her the letter. Folded again, tucked safely in its envelope. 2 years ago today, he said. She was buried in San Francisco. I hadn't been back since. Nora's lips parted slightly. Then she placed a gentle hand on his wrist. You came back to remember her, she said. Callum shook his head slowly. No, he replied. I think I came back to remember me. For a long moment, they sat without speaking. No need. Some silences were fuller than words. In the distance, the flight map on the overhead screen flickered to life. 2 hours, 45 minutes to San Francisco. But for Callum, time had already begun moving differently. This wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a crossing, a return, a quiet crumbling of walls he never knew how to name. Until now, the hum of the aircraft was steady, but inside Callum West, something stirred, a slow, low ache from the past, knocking gently, then louder. He looked down at his hands, hands that had signed billion-dollar deals, hands that had held Evelyn's face the night before she slipped away, hands that now trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from memory. Brooklyn, 1987. A boy stood on the porch of a run-down duplex. The wind bit through his jacket. Inside, His mother screamed at no one in particular. Callum had learned early silence was survival. He used to draw superheroes in the margins of his math homework. On the back, he'd scribble notes to himself one day. I'll buy a house so big I never have to hear them yell. At 10, he watched his father walk out. No goodbye, no bags, just the jingle of keys and the slamming of a door. Callum never cried. Not then. Not for many years. Instead, he got sharp. He got smart. By 15, he was hacking school databases, not to cheat, but to fix GPA calculations. By 22, he was building software that turned university labs into war rooms. By 30, he was the youngest tech CEO in California. People wrote headlines about him. The boy with no safety net becomes the man no one can catch. They called him ruthless, relentless, a genius. But genius is often just trauma repackaged in clean code. And Callum knew that too well. He stared at the plastic cup of water on his tray table now. So ordinary. So unlike the glass tumbler his mother once threw at him when he told her he got into Stanford. You think you're better than me? The shard had left a mark below his thumb. A pale crescent-shaped scar. Still there. Still cold. Evelyn was the first person who noticed. They'd been dating 6 months when she saw him rubbing his thumb absently at a dinner party. She touched his hand and said, "Who told you love had to hurt first?" He didn't answer, but that night he wrote his first poem since he was 12. She never saw it. He never let anyone read it. Until now. He pulled out his phone, opened the note, and reread it silently. I was born in the quiet between sirens. In the space where glass meets skin, I learned to speak with silence. But you taught me how to begin. Across the aisle, Nora was asleep, but not deeply. She stirred now and then, brow furrowed, as though her dreams carried weight too. The girls had shifted closer to her. Elle's fingers curled into the hem of her mother's sleeve. A picture of survival, not perfection. Callum admired that more than any keynote speech he'd ever given. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. And for a moment, let himself feel it. The little boy on the porch, the scar, the loneliness that even wealth couldn't drown. He let it rise up, not to drown in it, but to finally face it. A soft voice stirred him. Callum Nora was awake now, hair tousled, her voice low to avoid waking the girls. "You were mumbling," she said gently. Callum straightened. "Was I?" She nodded. "Something about the porch?" He blinked, then nodded. "I was 10. My dad had just left. I stood outside for hours, waiting for someone to come home that never would." Nora said nothing. She simply reached across the aisle, and for the first time, touched his hand. Warm, steady, no pity, just presence. "I've been on that porch too," she whispered. Callum looked at her, searching her expression, and for the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a CEO, not as a widower, not as a billionaire headline, but as a boy, a man, a human. He exhaled slowly, and something inside cracked. Not broken, just open, and when he smiled, it was different this time. It was real. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ramsey. We've been informed of some unexpected turbulence ahead, so please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Cabin crew, prepare for moderate disturbance." It was calm, measured, but something about his tone made Callum glance toward Nora. She was already pulling Zoe and Elle close, gently buckling their seatbelts. Callum fastened his own, then noticed the flicker of worry in Zoe's eyes. He reached across the aisle. Palm up. Still. Open. Zoe looked at him, then took it. Her little hand fit inside his like it had always belonged there. The plane jolted, a sudden downward shift, a ripple through the fuselage like a wave striking steel. Someone in the back shrieked. A few overhead bins popped open, loose items tumbling down. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Flight attendants moved quickly, securing loose carts, checking seatbelts, whispering reassurances with carefully composed faces. But Callum could read them. He had built companies on reading people before they spoke. Something wasn't right. A second jolt, this one sharper. The captain's voice came again, a little more clipped this time. We've hit a weather system that wasn't on radar. I assure you, we're trained for this. Please stay calm and remain seated. Nora's hand was now gripping Elle's knee. Not hard, just firm. Instinct. Callum looked out the window. Darkness. Clouds churning like waves below. And then, a sound. From behind him, not thunder, not metal. A voice. Excuse me, my wife, she's not breathing. A man in his 60s had stood up in row 6, his face pale, trembling. His wife was slumped against the window. Flight attendants rushed over. One of them, a young woman with a headset, called over the intercom. If we have any medical personnel on board, please press your call button immediately. No one moved. Silence. Then Callum stood. Nora looked up, startled. You're a doctor, she whispered. Callum shook his head, but his voice was steady. I built the health tech that monitors emergency vitals in half the hospitals in this country. I know how to read distress. I can help until someone else steps up. He crossed the aisle, knelt beside the woman, checked her pulse, pressed fingers gently beneath her jaw. Weak. But there. Her husband was panicking. Don't die on me. Sharon. Don't please. Don't. Callum placed a hand on his shoulder. Breathe. For her. Let me help her breathe too. Then he turned to the flight attendant. We need oxygen and defibrillator access. Now. She nodded, already moving. Back in his seat, Nora stared. This wasn't the man she'd first seen boarding the plane stoic, cloaked in grief. This was someone else. Present. Commanding, but calm. Elle whispered. Is he a superhero? Nora didn't answer right away. But in her mind, the word didn't seem so far off. Callum stayed with the woman for 20 minutes. Her pulse stabilized. She stirred faintly, whispering her husband's name. When the real medic on board a nurse from economy finally arrived, Callum stepped aside without ego. Let them work. He returned to his seat. Zoe gave him her last candy. He didn't eat it, just held it for a moment. Is she going to be okay? Zoe asked. Callum nodded. She'll be all right. You were really brave. Zoe beamed, then curled up again beside her sister. Nora didn't speak for several minutes. When she did, her voice was soft, but full of new recognition. You didn't hesitate? Callum's reply came slowly. I've spent years reacting to emergencies, just not the human kind. She smiled faintly. You could have fooled me. He looked at her, truly looked this time. Your daughters. They remind me what I forgot, he said, that we all need someone who won't look away when it matters. The turbulence passed. The seatbelt signs blinked off. And for the first time on this flight, there was laughter. Not loud, but real. Nora chuckled as Elle snored softly beside her, one sock halfway off. Callum smiled, and something inside him, something long buried, felt light. Maybe not whole yet, but no longer shattered. Night had deepened. Most of the passengers were asleep or drifting in and out. A soft hush blanketed the cabin, broken only by the occasional rustle of blankets or the clink of an ice cube in a forgotten drink. But Callum couldn't sleep, nor could Nora. They sat quietly for a while, a kind of peace settling between them, not silence, but understanding. Then she said it, low, deliberate, as if she'd rehearsed it before. "I think I knew your wife." Callum turned his head, eyes narrowing, but not in suspicion, in memory. Evelyn Nora nodded. She reached into her bag carefully so as not to wake Elle, and Zoe pulled out a worn envelope, folded several times, edges frayed. She handed it to him. "I got this in the mail 3 months ago. No return address. Just my name on the front." Callum took it, hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter, handwritten in a looping, familiar script. He recognized it instantly. To Nora, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means I kept my promise. Years ago, I met you by chance, after a lecture in Chicago. You were 7 months pregnant and barely holding it together. You thanked me for my talk on resilience. But the truth is, you were the one who inspired me. I made a note that night. If something ever happens to me, help her." I left behind a little fund, anonymous, just enough to get you through what I knew might be coming. But more than that, I want you to know I believed in you, in your girls, in the way you held on to hope when you had every reason not to. Don't let this world harden you. There's still light, and you're part of it. Evelyn West. Callum stared at the page, his breath caught halfway between grief and something else wonder. "She never told me," he murmured. Nora smiled faintly. "She didn't need to. I figured it out. Eventually. When I saw your name in the news. When the account labeled Foundation Hysteria paid my medical bills. When my daughters got those scholarship offers with no application." Callum blinked, stunned. "You mean yes," she said gently. "Your wife kept her promise, even after death. She made sure 2 little girls she met once wouldn't fall through the cracks." Zoe stirred in her sleep and reached for Nora. The motion grounded them again. Callum folded the letter, held it to his chest. "I thought I was the one who lost everything," he said softly. "But maybe she made sure I had something left to find." Nora looked at him then. Not like a stranger, not like a fan of his legacy, but like someone who had known pain and chose to keep loving anyway. She hesitated, then said, "There's something else. Something I need to ask." Callum nodded. "Anything." She glanced down at her sleeping daughters. "They need stability. And you, I think you need family. Not out of pity, but purpose." Callum said nothing for a long while, then leaned back, closed his eyes, and asked in voice almost a whisper, "What are you offering?" "Nora?" She looked out the window. Clouds parted slightly below, revealing the faintest glint of moonlight on the water far beneath. "I'm offering a way forward, not as a debt repaid, not as some fairy tale ending, just a beginning." The cabin lights dimmed further as the flight entered its final red-eye stretch across the Atlantic. Most passengers were asleep, but the cabin wasn't still. Not really. Something shifted, and Callum felt it before he saw it. A woman in her early 50s, perfectly polished pearls and posture both tight as wire, stood up from her seat in the front row of first class. Her name, according to the luggage tag swinging from her Birkin, was Marla Vanstone. She pressed the call button with the slow, deliberate tap of someone used to being obeyed. A flight attendant appeared. Smile rehearsed. Yes. Ma'am Marla leaned in and whispered, but not so quietly that Callum and Nora couldn't hear. I need to be moved away from that. She gestured toward Nora. And the girls. Her voice laced with something more poisonous than complaint. This is first class. It's not a nursery. And I paid full price. The flight attendant blinked, caught between procedure and instinct. Ma'am, all passengers in this cabin are ticketed. We Marla cut her off. Then I want them moved. Nora's spine straightened. She had been through too much to flinch from this, but she still instinctively pulled Zoe and Elle closer. Callum stood, not abruptly, but with presence. His voice was quiet, but in it was steel. Is there a problem here? Marla turned. When she saw who had spoken, her expression wavered just a second. Recognition. Oh, Mr. West, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were, well, I just assumed you'd prefer a quieter cabin. Children, you know. She tried to smile. Failed. Callum stepped forward. These children, he said, are the reason I'm in this cabin. Marla blinked. I don't understand. Nora rose too now, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. He didn't introduce her, didn't explain her, didn't need to. You don't have to understand, Callum said. You just need to adjust. There was a silence. Then someone behind Marla coughed awkwardly. A businessman in a blue vest gave Callum a faint nod. Someone else clapped, just once, then twice, soon. There were several small claps, quiet, but defiant. And Marla Vanstone sat down, hard. The flight attendant turned to Nora. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Please let me know if you need anything. Nora nodded politely, then glanced up at Callum, her expression unreadable, until he leaned closer and murmured, I guess I just burned the last of my billionaire PR. She smiled. Worth it. Later, when the cabin had settled again, Callum found himself staring out the window, not at the clouds, but at his reflection. He barely recognized the man looking back. Not the tie, loosened now, not the tired lines around his eyes, but the peace, a kind he hadn't felt since before Evelyn died. Zoe stirred beside him, eyes half closed. She whispered, Mr. Callum, yes, can we still be friends, even when we land? He smiled, soft, gentle. That would be my honor. In the row behind them, the businessman leaned forward. Mr. West. Callum turned. You ever think about getting back into the game? Callum raised an eyebrow. Game business. You've still got fire. And what you just did, it meant something. Callum didn't answer right away. He looked at Nora, at her daughters, at the letter still folded in his jacket pocket. Then he said, I think I'm building something else now. The cabin lights came on slowly. A soft chime announced they'd begun the final descent into New York. Nora leaned forward, tightening Elle's seatbelt as Zoe yawned beside her. Callum had barely moved. He sat upright, phone in hand, staring at the screen. The call had come in 15 minutes ago, a private channel reserved only for executive emergencies. The name on the caller ID, Miles Redford, the current acting CEO of West Point Technologies. His former company, Callum, Miles had said breathlessly. They're doing it. The board just greenlit Project Nimbus. Callum's voice was low, measured. They weren't supposed to touch that. It's not just that they're launching it. Callum, they're outsourcing the R&D to a division in Jakarta. Do you know what that means? Callum did. It meant thousands of American jobs engineers, chemists, developers would be slashed. It meant local ethics standards. environmental compliance, safety protocols gone. But more than that, it meant Evelyn's legacy. Her final innovation would be used for profit at the cost of human lives. Miles kept talking. The press release is going out tonight. It's already pre-approved. I couldn't stop them. Then why call me Callum? Asked quietly. A pause. Because they're afraid of you. You're still the name the public trusts. If you speak up, they'll have to halt it. Even now. Another pause. Then Miles added, Evelyn wouldn't have let this happen. You know that. Callum ended the call without replying. Now he stared out the window, not at the skyline growing larger, but inward. Would stepping back into the spotlight make him lose the quiet peace he'd just begun to rebuild? Would exposing the truth about West Point cause a scandal that followed Nora and the girls? Could he risk that? Was he strong enough? Nora noticed his stillness. You okay? Callum turned to her, eyes stormy, voice low. They're destroying everything she believed in. Nora nodded. She didn't ask who they were. She just understood, then stopped them. He blinked, surprised. Just like that, Callum, she said softly. You're the only one who can... Zoe tugged on his sleeve, whispered sleepily. You can be like a hero, like in movies. The plane jolted slightly as it descended through turbulence. Outside, the early dawn cast pale light over the ocean. Callum closed his eyes. He pictured Evelyn, not just in memory, but in her lab coat, hair in a messy bun, laughing as she scribbled on whiteboards. She'd once told him, success isn't about being remembered. It's about making sure no one is forgotten. When the plane touched down, a ripple of applause filled the cabin. The pilot made a brief announcement about the local weather. People stretched, gathered belongings. Nora reached for her bag. Zoe helped Elle with her shoes, and Callum. He took a deep breath, pulled out his phone, typed a message to Miles. Call a press conference. Noon. Tell them I'm coming. The press room at Midtown Manhattan's Westbridge Hall was swarming. Camera crews, reporters, industry analysts, even late-night comedy writers had sent interns. Callum West hadn't been seen in public in nearly 2 years. Now, he was back and making a statement, flanked by 2 simple pull-up banners bearing the faded logo of West Point Technologies. He stepped up to the microphone. He wore no tie, just a dark navy shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. No prepared remarks, just a folded note in his pocket, Evelyn's handwriting scrawled faintly on it. Be loud only when it protects the quiet. The room hushed. He began. Today, I'm here not as a former CEO, not as a billionaire, and not even as a stakeholder. I'm here as a husband, a man who once built something beautiful and watched it become something dangerous. Murmurs swept across the audience. The board of West Point has authorized a project called Nimbus, which, if executed, will offshore thousands of American jobs, gut our R&D ethics, and turn what was once a human-centered technology into a profit machine built on exploitation. I didn't leave my company. I left what my company became. Gasps. Hands flew up. Reporters scribbled. One called out, Mr. West, are you alleging criminal intent? I'm alleging moral cowardice, which sometimes is worse. The crowd buzzed louder, but Callum didn't flinch. He leaned forward, voice low but resonant. Evelyn West, the woman who built Nimbus, believed in people, in compassion, in giving communities dignity. If West Point chooses to move forward with this, I will devote every resource I have, every ounce of my name and credibility, to expose and halt it. A pause. This is not revenge. This is memory. This is promise. The press conference ended in chaos, but it wasn't over, because by noon, Twitter was flooded with images of Callum and Nora together. Headlines spun wild speculation. Mystery widow beside Callum West. Who is she? Callum West's comeback and the woman who may have saved him. 2 kids, a grave, and one billionaire's redemption arc. Some articles were kind. Most were cruel. One even published a pixelated photo of Elle holding Zoe's hand on the tarmac. Nora saw it on a newsstand, and her heart sank. That night, inside the hotel suite Callum had reserved for them all, silence reigned. Nora sat at the window, watching lights flicker from taxis below. Zoe slept curled against Elle, and Callum stood at the door, phone in hand, reading a new wave of articles. "They're turning it into a circus," Nora whispered. He looked at her. "I know. They'll come for me next," she said quietly. "Dig up David, my old life, maybe even the school where I teach." Callum took a slow breath. He crossed the room, knelt beside her. "I can make it stop." She looked at him, eyes weary. "But do you want to?" That question landed harder than she meant it to. But Callum didn't get angry. He just let it linger. In the silence, he reached into his coat and pulled out the folded note. Handed it to her. She opened it. 4 words, not without their dignity. Evelyn. Nora exhaled slowly. She was extraordinary. Wasn't she? Callum nodded. She was everything I wasn't. Until now. She looked down. "So, what happens next, I don't know," he said truthfully. Then added, "But I'd rather find out with you. If you'll stay." She didn't say anything, just leaned her head to his shoulder, and for the first time that day, they both stopped trying to carry everything alone. It had been over 700 days since Callum last stood inside the glass-paneled boardroom on the 41st floor of West Point Tower. And yet, nothing had changed. The leather chairs still creaked the same way. The skyline of Manhattan still hung outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same bowl of untouched mints still sat in the center of the long oak table. What was different was him. 12 board members stared at him with varying degrees of tension, caution, and calculation. At the head sat Preston Vale, acting chairman, and beside him, Joanna Maris, legal counsel and the one who'd pushed Project Nimbus hardest. Callum took his seat. No warm greetings, no welcome back. Preston spoke first. "You've made quite the splash." "Callum, the truth tends to ripple," Callum said calmly. Joanna cut in. Brisk. "Let's skip the philosophy. You've smeared the company, violated your exit NDA, jeopardized shareholder confidence." Callum raised a hand, still composed, and reminded the world that this company once stood for something. A silence fell. Then Preston folded his hands. "What do you want?" Callum met his eyes. "To invoke Clause 7 power of the Foundation Charter." Actual gasps. Joanna's voice sharpened. "That clause is symbolic." "Not quite," Callum replied. "It was written into the original founding bylaws. If the company strays from ethical guidelines defined by its visionary team, namely Evelyn West, grants founding partners veto power, and I was one." The room erupted in whispers. Preston looked pale. "Callum, if you do this, Nimbus dies. So does the entire 4th quarter forecast. Better a bad quarter than a broken conscience. Shareholders won't forgive." "Then let them sue me," Callum said. "But I won't let Evelyn's work be twisted. I'd rather burn this whole empire down than watch you sell its soul." It was the first time in years anyone in that room had heard fire in his voice. "Real fire," Joanna sneered. And you think the public will cheer as you kill jobs. Derail innovation. Callum leaned forward, voice low. No, I think they'll remember that someone finally said enough. He stood, dropped a file on the table, documentation of whistleblower statements, internal emails, offshore violations, and a copy of Evelyn's original Nimbus proposal. The board members stared at it like it was a ghost. Callum said nothing else, just turned and walked out, downstairs. Nora waited with Zoe and Elle in the building's private lounge. When he appeared, Zoe ran to him. "Did you win?" Callum knelt, smiled faintly. "I didn't lose." Nora stood. Something in his eyes had changed. Lighter. Not free, but facing forward. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," Callum said, looking at all three of them. "We build something better. Something that remembers people, not just profits." The plane hummed quietly as it cut through the late evening sky. Nora sat by the window. Zoe and Elle curled beside her, their heads gently swaying with the motion of Flight 217 from New York to Seattle. And across the aisle, silent, thoughtful, Callum West sat with a journal open in his lap. He wasn't writing in it. He was holding it like a memory. The cabin was dark, except for the soft golden hue of the overhead lights. A flight attendant passed with hot towels. Nora politely declined, but her thoughts were tangled. The last 48 hours had been a storm. Callum's press conference, the boardroom battle, the world suddenly watching her again, like she was a character in someone else's fairy tale. Except this wasn't a fairy tale, and she wasn't some rescue mission. Callum glanced over. "You okay?" She nodded, then added softly, "Just sorting through the noise." He smiled gently. "Same." She looked at him, hesitant. "Back in the lounge, you said something about building something better, with people in mind." He nodded. "I meant it." A pause. "Including us?" she asked carefully. Callum closed the journal. "Nora, I don't want to make you an offer that feels like charity, or worse, ownership. But I also won't pretend that I don't see something here. With you, with them, with all of us." He leaned in slightly. "Come with me, not as a guest, not even as a partner in business, but as something I haven't had since Evelyn." His voice softened. "A reason." Nora's breath caught. She looked away, heart pounding. For a moment, the drone of the engines filled the quiet. Zoe stirred, then rolled closer to her. "I'm scared," the little girl murmured in her sleep. Nora kissed her forehead gently, then whispered more to herself than anyone. "So am I." She turned to Callum. "I want to believe you, but I've built this life brick by brick out of grief and grit. I can't let it become someone else's shadow." Callum's gaze didn't falter. "Then don't. Let it become a bridge." That made her pause, because deep inside, her beneath the teacher, beneath the widow, beneath the mother was a woman who hadn't dreamed in years. And now, the door was opening, not for escape, but for possibility. As the captain's voice echoed softly through the cabin, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent." Nora closed her eyes. She reached into her purse, pulled out a worn photograph of David, holding baby Zoe. Folded beside it was a drawing Elle had made. 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a sunset. She smiled through the ache, then looked at Callum again. "I'll think about it," she said. "I'll wait," he replied. The plane touched down in Seattle under a quiet sky. A new chapter waiting. But neither of them rushed, because sometimes The right stories take time to unfold. Seattle's rain tapped gently on the glass walls of the terminal. The airport was alive with motion families reuniting, briefcases rolling, voices echoing beneath departure boards. But at gate C-14 time moved slower. Callum stood a few paces behind Nora as she knelt beside Zoe and Elle, helping them zip their jackets. They were almost at the exit, almost back to the lives they'd paused for a journey none of them had expected. Callum had offered to drive them home. Nora politely declined. "We need space," she had said, "to breathe, to let this land." He understood. Didn't press, only nodded. Elle tugged at Zoe's sleeve and whispered, giggling. Then Zoe turned to Callum. "Big eyes, big words. Are you going to be our new daddy now?" The question silenced everything. Even the announcements overhead faded into a hush. Nora blinked, stunned. Not at Zoe's innocence, but at the clarity of what it meant. Callum stepped forward slowly, kneeling down to their level. He looked at both girls, then at Nora. "Only if your mom says it's okay," he said softly. "And only if it's something we grow into together." Zoe nodded. Elle tilted her head. Then, in a quiet, almost magical moment, the little one whispered, "We choose you." 3 words, so small, but they struck deeper than any title, any contract, any boardroom vow. Nora's throat tightened. She felt something inside her shift, not like lightning, more like thawing, the kind of warmth that comes after years of waiting and cold. She met Callum's gaze, and for the first time in so long, she allowed herself to hope out loud. "Let's take this one step at a time." Callum smiled. "I'll walk every step." They didn't kiss, not yet, but something passed between them, more binding than touch, more honest than words, a promise made not in grand gestures, but in presence. They parted at the curb. Callum watched them go, Nora holding both girls' hands, laughter floating faintly in the rain. And as the taxi disappeared into the drizzle, Callum pulled out his phone, opened a new email draft. To Miles Redford's subject, a new proposal. First line. Let's build a new foundation that starts not with power, but with people. That night, in a quiet apartment filled with silence and echoes of Evelyn's memory, Callum placed the old wedding ring back in its box. Next to it, he added something new, a crayon drawing, 4 stick figures, holding hands under the rain. What started as a flight for strangers ended as the beginning of a family. Because sometimes, all it takes is a moment, a glance, a question, or 3 simple words whispered at the right time, to remind us we are never as alone as we think. This story isn't just about second chances. It's a mirror, a challenge to how we treat others when no one's watching, to how we see people who don't fit our expectations, and to what love, dignity, and empathy look like when they're put into action. Let this be a reminder. Discrimination doesn't just hurt, it dehumanizes, but compassion. Compassion rebuilds, and maybe, just maybe, what we all need is to listen more closely to those quiet voices asking to be seen. If this story touched your heart, like it to show your support, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true-to-life stories that speak to the soul. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay kind, stay human, stay hopeful.